Hello, I'm Doug White, and it's the Security Weekly News. It is episode 302, and it is the week of 4 June 2023. We've got Ducking AI, Kimsuky Redux, SMBs signing, MoveIt, Gigabyte, Splunk, Chrome extensions, AI, Jason Wood, and more on this edition of the Security Weekly News.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News.
Did you know that Active Directory is exploited in 9 out of 10 cyber attacks? With access to Active Directory, attackers can gain control of your network. To keep attackers out, you need to find and fix Active Directory security gaps. Meet Purple Knight, a free security assessment tool that scans your environment for hundreds of vulnerabilities and helps you fix the problems. Ready to reduce your Active Directory attack surface? Download Purple Knight, the #1 Active Directory security vulnerability assessment tool. Visit securityweekly.com/Semperis, SEMPERIS, for more information.
Application Security Weekly delivers interviews and news from the worlds of AppSec, DevOps, and all the other ways people find and fix software flaws. Join us as we explore how the latest news highlights modern security practices or reminds us of the missing ones. We also bring insights from interviews on topics from training to threat modeling, from open source tools to cloud-native techniques, plus an occasional reference from new wave to synthwave. Find us at securityweekly.com/subscribe or look for Application Security Weekly wherever you pick your podcasts.
Well, after a nice holiday week, we're back with the Security Weekly News, and we are working on content we can air during the holiday week. It's a little harder with the news and a best of or something like that, so we'll work something out. I know we talked about this before, but once again, APT43, which is known as Kimsuky, has been impersonating journalists and academics for spear phishing campaigns with a focus on think tanks, research centers, academic institutions, and other media organizations. A warning about the North Korean affiliated attacker comes from multiple agencies in the United States and South Korea who track Kimsuky. I just like saying Kimsuky. I think it's pretty fun. Kimsuky, yeah. The advisory was issued by the FBI, the U.S. State Department, the NSA, the National Intelligence Service of South Korea, which is called NIS, the National Police Agency, or NPA, of South Korea, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I don't know what they're called, but maybe they're just called the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But there was like a lot of people to jump on this. The statement said that Kimsuky was part of the North Korean Reconnaissance General Bureau, or RGB. It was alphabet soup in this story. Kimsuky's been around since about 2012, so they're a pretty old attack group. And they usually conduct large-scale espionage campaigns on behalf of the North Korean government. The contacts from email addresses which they use usually closely resemble real individuals in your organization or some other organization, and they contain convincing, realistic content. The latest one that they were sending out basically says, quote, "My name is," insert name here. Well, it actually doesn't say insert name here, but you know. And it says, "I am a writer for some," insert publication name here that you would be aware of. The email does mention that they're preparing a program related to North Korean issues. The one that they provided as an example has the name of a professor at a university, and they probably use a real name there. So it may say, Professor Doug White at Roger Williams University or something like that. I know I flatter myself that I'm being used in North Korean attack campaigns. But they say that the professor recommended the recipient of the email as an expert, and that kind of stuff. I mean, we're pretty familiar with these kind of letters by now, but this is yet another one. And the one I was reading looked like it might come from a reporter. And I do get legitimate ones like that sometimes. Another one they provided an example was asking you to fill out a questionnaire, and we get those all the time as well, but I don't fill out questionnaires for free. You have to pay me to do that, and you have to pay me a lot more than they usually offer when they do offer to pay me, and then it's usually a scam. So if they offer me enough to make it, I'm willing to do it, then it's usually a scam. So anyway, they didn't discuss what the payload was in the article. I presume it's some kind of exfiltration stuff, since that's what they usually do. I got something this morning like this. It wasn't a Kimsuky one, but it was a different one that basically saying something very, very similar to this. And I get them pretty regularly, saying, hey, we'd love to contact you regarding something. And if you look at the links or whatever, it immediately looks suspicious. So it may be that time again to remind your people that these guys are still out there. They're clever. They get more clever all the time. They love to play to vanity. The one I got asked if I wanted to be part of a male exotic dancer troupe, due to my astounding physique. So it was probably legit, but you may get ones with stuff like that that's not so legit. But I'm going to read that later and probably be off to the high life of exotic dancing, kind of stuff. But, Gil won't be around here much longer. Microsoft said they would be adding a requirement to use SMB signing for all connections in Windows 11 due to NTLM relay attacks, and that the build that was released today on the Enterprise Edition was starting to roll out to certain users that requires this by default. Now, if you don't recall, NTLM relay attacks basically can force network devices and domain controllers to authenticate against malicious servers that the attackers control. So they basically contact your domain controller or other network equipment and provide, various things to allow those to authenticate, which then basically allows them to join your network with their domain controller. And they immediately proceed to elevate privileges, run Mimikatz, all kinds of stuff, which can basically allow them to take over your whole domain. Traditionally, Windows 10 and 11 only required SMB signing if they were connecting to very specific shares like sysvol and netlogon, but not everything. Domain controllers do require signing for any kind of connection between domain controllers. So what they do is they target Windows 11 and Windows 10 desktops and connect it that direction, and that allows them then to get into the domain, and then they escalate from there. But requiring this means that fake authentication requests are going to be a lot more difficult to craft. Not impossible, but a lot more difficult. And the identities that are sent via signatures and hashes then make them much harder to spoof. The problem with this is it hits, adding this requirement hits performance in the domain, because now you've got these many, many, many connections that are going on in the background, all having to, validate and so forth. So it could affect the performance. It's always faster to get in the house if you don't lock the doors, but there's a problem with that. So Microsoft said, quote, SMB signing can reduce the performance of SMB copy operations. Makes sense. And they went on to say, you can mitigate this with more physical CPU cores. Imagine that. Or virtual CPUs, as well as newer, faster CPUs. They then proceeded to introduce Carlos, their new head of CPU and virtual sales, to the crowd. I might have made that part up. But anyway, it is possible to disable SMB in PowerShell. I don't think it's a good idea, but I guess if you're having problems. My grandfather always cut the seatbelt out of his car. Right up front. That was the first thing he did when he got a car, was cut the seatbelts out, because he said they were for wimps and that a real man could take a good hit to the forehead on a tree, or he wasn't a real man, Sonny. So for some reason, when I dream that, my grandfather's always Christopher Walken, and he keeps trying to give me a watch. But, yeah. Progress Software issued an announcement on 31 May to customers that MoveIt Transfer, which is their managed file transfer solution that a lot of people use, and they said it was affected by a critical SQL injection vulnerability that can be exploited by an unauthenticated attacker, and by doing that, the attacker can then achieve access to the Access database that they have for the product. So that would mean they can get credentials out of there. The issue is a 0-day that has now been patched in this product, but the issue also affected MoveIt Cloud, but that was patched automatically by the cloud doctors. Several firms reported seeing attacks which involve this 0-day already, including Huntress, Rapid7, TrustedSec, Grey Noise, Mandiant, and Velexity. So that probably means there's a lot of attacks going on. Mandiant reported the first attacks on the 27th of May, but Grey Noise said they have observed scanning which was possibly related to this as early as March. The attackers, which are called UNC 4857 currently, were identified by Mandiant. The attack delivers a web shell Trojan, which will then allow them to use MoveIt to basically extract all the customer data that they want to get. Mandiant named the web shell they were using Lemur Loot. And victims so far have been identified in the United States, Canada, and India. And they did say that data theft occurred within minutes of web shell deployment in some of the cases. Mandy had said there are similarities with Fin11 and Clop, but Microsoft said they are confident it is a Clop ransomware affiliated group based on all the fingerprinting that they did. Microsoft calls the group Lace Tempest at this point. Showdown showed roughly 2,500 exposed MoveIt systems, mostly in the U.S. as of the 5th of June. CISA did add this to the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog this weekend and instructed government agencies to patch as soon as possible. Rapid7 issued a blog post over the weekend that described a method to determine what data and how much data was exfiltrated as well. So if you're using this product, patch it now. Don't wait. Finish the news. I don't know. You should patch it now. Don't finish the news. You can watch the news later. You can get the recording. Gigabyte is a Taiwanese company that makes motherboards. They're pretty well known, and recently found that their UEFI had a backdoor feature built into it on hundreds of their different motherboard products. Eclipsium disclosed this last week and said that the firmware of more than 270 Gigabyte motherboards drops a Windows binary that is executed at boot up to fetch and execute a payload from Gigabyte servers. So that almost sounded legitimate somehow. When they said it was fetching from Gigabyte servers. They did go on to say there's no indication that this has been exploited in the wild, but that this sort of thing has been exploited in the past. And Eclipsium, of course, is very, very well versed in this, and Paul works over there, and so they have a really big team of people that specialize in UEFI. Shortly after the report was released, Gigabyte released a BIOS update to address the issue. The list of affected devices is included in the article, or there's a link to it that's on the site. So if you're worried about that, or if you have Gigabyte motherboard, I know I used to have a bunch of them in the lab. It does say that users should go to Gigabyte and download any BIOS updates released after 1 June 2023 immediately. So, take that to heart if you're using their products. On Thursday, Splunk announced that there were updates available for Splunk Enterprise to resolve multiple high-severity vulnerabilities. The worst of these allowed privilege escalation to low-privilege users who had the edit_user capacity. There were a whole pile of other issues, including medium severities and other high severities that were found in the Splunk Enterprise platform. Splunk said that a number of medium severity issues were resolved as well, along with other fixes. So if you're using Splunk Enterprise or even Splunk, I would be sure you're patched up, because that sounds like something that may well be exploited pretty shortly. So check that out. Vladimir Palant found 3 weeks ago found extensions in the Chrome Web Store which contain malicious code, and I always hate to see that, but I'm not surprised either. The first code that Palant found was the PDF Toolbox extension, which I immediately looked to see if I had it installed, but I didn't, thankfully. And they said it contained obfuscated code, which after they reassembled it was allowed a third-party website to inject JavaScript code into all the websites that the user visited. I would presume this is some kind of ad, splash kind of campaign. A tip that another extension was making a request to a third-party server resulted in them finding 2 more versions of that same code in a total of 34 extensions connecting to those same 2 servers. One of them was identified as sarasearchtop.com, and the other one was tryimv3serves.com. If you want to see what they are exactly, you can look it up in the article. The identified extensions showed an install base of roughly 87 million or so users. So that's quite a few. And the most popular extensions that were infected was AutoSkip for YouTube, which is a common one that I've heard of people using. I didn't have that one either. But 9 million people had installed AutoSkip. SoundBoost had 7 million. Crystal Ad Blocker had 6 million. And Brisk VPN was 5 million, among others. So there was a whole pile of them. Most of the extensions identified had more than 1 million installs each, but the article suggests that it's possible these numbers are inflated, which is a common tactic with this kind of stuff. Run a script, make sure it's installed a bunch of times so that it looks legit, because that is something people check. The purpose of the malicious code appears to be related to popping up unwanted ads and hijacking search results to display sponsored links. But the article goes on to say that the researchers have not yet fully analyzed the entire nature of the attack. And of course, if they can inject JavaScript, they can do all sorts of things to you, if you're running it on your browser. According to this next article, it may be difficult to, or even impossible, to flag writing being done by AIs. The article goes on to say that asking the AI to identify AI written papers may not be very effective. So this was all based on a study that Turnitin, and if you aren't familiar with Turnitin, you probably haven't been in school or ever taught at a school, but a lot of educational institution uses this massive product that basically scans for cheating. So Turnitin started off just comparing all the papers that were in Turnitin to everything else, and then they expanded, includes website scanning, all kinds of stuff to try to catch it when students cheat. And they do cheat all the time. I mean, people they just copy stuff right off the internet and turn it in, and it's really ridiculous. But Turnitin said they had been running an AI detection algorithm on more than 38 million essays turned in since April, and that there appears to be a greater problem with reliability of this AI scanning than they initially thought. Turnitin now assigns a, quote, generated by AI percentage to each paper. So if you've ever used this or seen your results, it shows you how much of the paper they think is copied. And so a lot of people on their syllabi and classes will say, if you exceed a certain percentage of this on these Turnitin scores, you may be considered plagiarizing. I know on mine it says 50%. So if more than 50% of your paper can be directly tied to sites, I look at it closely. Detection software has always been a problem, though. And just like catching criminals, it's a lot more difficult to catch really smart criminals than really dumb criminals. And I mean, when I read a student paper that says something like, forsooth, I dost program thine Fortran, sirrah, I tend to get suspicious. And you think that sounds almost ridiculous, but I've seen stuff that was almost that silly. One of my favorites was, I was seeing all these links saying, click here to refer to the appendix, and I'm like, wait a minute. Or, links into Microsoft documents and stuff like that. Yeah. And then, of course, you go to Microsoft and find the exact document the student's using. And of course, just like when a student goes from not being able to code hello world, I've had students who are, trying to do a first assignment in a computer science class, writing me saying they need a tutor to help them. Can I help them? Can I come in this weekend and spend 12 or 15 hours helping them get started? And then suddenly they turn in like an amazing recursive solution to the problem a week later. Yeah, I'm a little suspicious. But I mean, ChatGPT is really good at writing. I've been experimenting with it a lot, and teachers face a lot of headwind when it comes to cheating. So in the modern age, accusing some student of cheating is often fraught with peril. I mean, and if you're wrong, it really is bad. You're going to have a bunch of people on your case if you accuse somebody of cheating and it turns out they maybe weren't. So my experience is to err on the side of false negatives. I mean, that's sad but true. Of course, if you're cheating yourself mostly. It's just kind of lame. But concerns in the article range from false positive accusations to bad detection rates for students for whom English is a second language, which is also a comment I made on papers. So I guess it's going to be just the same as always. In my day, you could order a term paper on Thomas Jefferson for $15 out of the back of Rolling Stone and turn it in. And I knew people who did stuff like that. Not that I ever did, but today it is a lot easier to cheat. It's a lot easier to get content, but it is also easier for you as an educator to look for this kind of stuff as well. So, well, his beloved character was famous for the phrase, "No, don't touch that," on the comedic cop series Bango and Hash. Please welcome Jason Wood.
Hey, everybody. Good to be back with you after our little break there. Yesterday, as I was preparing for the podcast, I ran across an article on the Register that really made me stop and think a little bit about the risks some folks take who are doing things like security defense and threat intelligence and things like that in different areas of the world, particularly when they get unpopular with powerful groups. Now, here in the U.S., we're fairly lucky in that, and in Europe, most of Europe, I suppose, where we could carp and criticize our government and other governments with very little fear about particular consequence. If I'm wrong, y'all can yell and complain at me and stuff like that, and maybe my reputation takes a hit or something along those lines. But then you read about groups that the Register had here. They did a profile on a company named Team T5 based out of Taiwan, which has built their business doing just, basically EDR and threat intelligence for companies in the Asia Pacific region, and specifically they're going out and calling out activity around state-sponsored activity. And you can already see some conflict brewing here as we've got a group in Taiwan talking about threat intelligence and going after APTs. It was just a really interesting article to me to see this profile of these folks and some of the things that they actually face just to do their job. So the company itself, Team T5, I had not heard of. There's security team based in Taiwan. They have 3 different products, an EDR product, forensic analysis platform, and they provide threat intelligence. Fortunately, they had an English version of their website. Thanks, Team T5, because I appreciated that. And looking around, they've got some good research, but they also don't appear to be a very large company. I glanced around as best I could to try and find out some information, about their size and what's going on. You've got there's about 60 people on LinkedIn, which, maybe not mean anything because they're in Taiwan and LinkedIn's a US company. So maybe not that particular relevant for the area. The Crunchbase lists them at about 100 to 250 employees, and I did see they have about 35 job openings right now, which kind of fit into that over 100 employees, 200 employees type of category. Either way, we're not talking about a huge company here. But in spite of their size, according to the register, they've already come under fire at least a couple of times by what appears to be responses to try and attack the company's reputation and their business. In particular, they had a couple of press releases that got pushed out that appeared to be, when they looked back on it, so it was published in Japanese as far as the language, but then they had Chinese characters that were accidentally put into it and some other stuff. There was some other information that made everybody believe that the author of these releases spoke Chinese primarily. First one was back in 2021. A fake news report was released that accused the company of attacking the Japanese government and other tech companies. And then a week later, that was followed up with a fake press release published by a newswire that pretended to be from Kaspersky. Again, accusing the company of attacking Japanese government, which is significant to them because actually they have, customers in Japan and employees based in Japan. So, and it just, we're playing in here with this reputation. We're trying to, it looks like trying to make it look like anything these folks say shouldn't be listened to or that they're unreliable. And so, here in particular, they've got threat intelligence, particularly calling out, the actors sponsored by the People's Republic of China. And the register had a line that I kind of liked, where they said, and this is a quote, "Team T5 has long expected that Beijing is aware of its work," end quote, which I thought was just a major understatement. They make their business tracking APT actors, living on an island less than 80 miles away from Chinese mainland at one of its narrow points. And last year at Black Hat Asia, the firm got up and did a presentation on Pangolin 8 Rat, which is used by threat actors with links to China. And in that presentation, one of their researchers, Sylvia Yi, was quoted as saying, "Pay attention to Chinese policies. They may have an effect on the malware you see in your region," end quote. Now, with all of this, this proximity and stuff like that, that they have to the PRC, as you can imagine, this causes some interesting dynamics that I have never really spent time considering too much here in the U.S. You basically, the register kind of hints at it, doesn't really get into a lot of their defensive difficulties. I can only imagine what it looks like to defend their network. But they said it's even difficult to hire and recruit people because, they're concerned about a number of potential candidates that have already been compromised by the PRC because they've gone over to do visits and had, likely had devices compromised as part of this. pressure that could be maybe put on family members. I don't know. I've been able to, when I again mentioned the idea of defending the network, the different attacks that they must be facing. I've been able to at least have some view into intrusions in this area of the world, and I can, one of my observations was if you're in a company that is in a industry or vertical that is of interest to the PRC, then you're under fire, and it doesn't matter how big you are. Even really small firms, they get attention around this. And as political tensions increase in the region, you see that increase, on some of these attacks, or at least that's my observation of it. But that's just computers being compromised. Here's where I thought was the interesting risk, and this is what made me stop and think about it a little bit. They quoted Charles Lee, chief analyst with the company, basically saying that personal security concerns are something that their candidates have to really stop and think about before they take a job with the company. They're coming in here, they take a look, everything looks great with this organization, but then they're seeing some of the stuff they publish, and the candidates start to get a little queasy about what does this mean if things go bad later on. We've seen these articles in the news openly talking about, well, when is People's Republic of China going to try and take over Taiwan? Are they going to invade? Things like that. Let's say that the PRC gets control of Taiwan, whether due to invasion or some other mechanism. The PRC comes in, takes over, and now if you've been an individual who is openly critical of the PRC and its efforts, then you may find yourself up for likely being picked up for a little bit of re-education on the benevolent rule of the PRC. Probably some family members too, I would think, and that's got to be a little bit of that would cause some pause, I think, for folks working in the field. And I think it takes a little bit of nerve to take on a job like this when you're this close to one of your main adversaries. So the article itself really, as you're looking at the team, they've got some interesting research, links from there to like Pangolin 8 Rat and some other things that they've done as far as presentations. But it was a reminder to me that, here in the US, in Europe, this is fairly straightforward. We get a job, we do interesting work. Sometimes you work at places that call out other countries for doing things that we don't particularly agree with or like. But our fellow defenders in other areas of the world, this is much riskier proposition than we're used to. Even in this article my commentary here, I've made a number of comments maybe that somebody in the PRC might take the dim view to, because I sound a little critical. But I don't face much of a risk here. But others, that are essentially our colleagues out there, they don't have that same luxury. The Team T5 folks that were interviewed for the register actually laughed at one point when it came up that without the threat of the PRC, Team T5 wouldn't be a business, and that because of what's going on, that business is good. But it sounded like kind of a gallows humor type of thing to me in some ways. So today their work provides for them and supports their national security, and it's important to them, but things could get very rough in the future, especially if the PRC reaches its goal of reunification with Taiwan. And of course, that would be done with the PRC in control, because that's the way they would prefer it to be. So if you're interested in taking a look at and maybe having a little bit of a think about what some of our other defenders out there face, I'd recommend you take a look at this article. It was kind of an interesting read.
All right. Thank you, Jason. And finally, Apple announced that their new iPhone autocorrect model, it will stop converting what you meant to say to things like duck you, mother ducker. If you have an iPhone and you use a lot of swears, I don't, of course, since I only use my phone to assist little old ladies across the street. But if you do, you know that duck appears quite often in your texting conversations, more than maybe you would have expected in normal life. unless you work with ducks or something like that, But, I mean, I like ducks. I mean, they're tasty. But Apple causes this ducking issue, as they described it. So ducking lots of memes and jokes around claiming that big tech may be censoring profanity, but there's really not much evidence of that that's an actual conspiracy. There's more evidence of that than a lot of other conspiracies. But, I mean, AI is learning, and I remember how proud I was the day my chatbot called me a sock-stuffing duck face. I mean, I was so proud. But at the big release event this week, Apple said this was going to be fixed in new releases. So then maybe, just maybe, my ducking text will not be so ducked up. I mean, really. But I will be at the Green Cities Conference at Augsburg, Germany on the 20th, 24th of June. If you're going to be in that vicinity, drop by. And that is the news. Thanks, Jason Wood, and we'll see you on Friday.